The moment I walked into that ballroom, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just didn't know if my legs would carry me all the way to the stage. The room was everything my father loved. Chandelier light catching crystal glasses, men in tuxedos laughing with their mouths open, women in silk that cost more than my monthly rent. The Hargrove Foundation annual gala, his crown jewel, his yearly performance, the event where my father reminded everyone in 3 counties exactly who he was. I had driven 4 hours to be there. I hadn't been invited. Let me back up. I am 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, I have been the daughter my father forgot to brag about. My older brother got the business school stories. My younger sister got the beauty pageant photos on the mantle. I got a polite smile at Christmas and a business card holder for my college graduation that I still haven't opened. I worked as a licensed addiction counselor at a residential treatment center outside of Asheville, North Carolina. I have a master's degree in clinical social work. I have sat with people at the lowest points of their lives, at 3 in the morning when the shaking won't stop, when they're crying so hard they can't breathe, when they look at me and say they don't see the point anymore. I have watched people come back from places most people don't survive. That is my job. That is what I chose. My father called it working at a halfway house. The first time he said it out loud at a family dinner, I thought I'd misheard him. We were at my parents' house in Charlotte, the house with the iron gate and the circular driveway. And my uncle had asked what I was up to these days. Before I could open my mouth, my father set down his fork and said, "She works at a halfway house. You know, with the addicts." He said the word addicts the way people say cockroaches. Something to be managed. Something distasteful. I said I was actually the clinical director of the residential program. He picked his fork back up and changed the subject. That was 4 years ago. I stopped going home for the big holidays after that. It was easier to tell myself it didn't sting than to sit at that table and watch him decide over and over again that I wasn't worth acknowledging. My father's name is Douglas Hargrove. In Charlotte, that name means something. He built a commercial real estate portfolio starting in his 30s, sold at exactly the right time, and then, in what I can only describe as a genius PR move, started a foundation that funded substance abuse recovery programs across the Carolinas, the Hargrove Foundation, named after himself, of course. The irony of that never got old for me. The foundation was well regarded. It gave out grants every year, 10 to 15 nonprofits, some of them doing genuinely important work. My treatment center applied for one of those grants 3 years in a row. We were the kind of organization the foundation was built to support, a mid-size residential program with sliding scale fees, serving patients who had no private insurance, no family money, nobody coming to pick them up on discharge day. We never received a grant. Not once. The first year, I assumed it was competitive. The second year, I looked more carefully at who did receive grants and noticed a pattern. Several of the recipients had board members who golfed with my father, sat on the same committees, attended the same church. The third year, I submitted our application and watched it disappear without even a form rejection letter. I mentioned this to my mother once, carefully. She said I shouldn't mix family and work. She said my father probably didn't even know I had applied. She said I should let it go. I let it go. What I did not let go was the audit. Here is the part of the story that people don't know about my father. He is excellent at appearances and careless about details. He trusts the wrong people and fires the right ones. He hired a financial manager for the foundation 6 years ago, a man named his old college roommate's son, as a favor, and never looked closely at what that manager was actually doing with the operational budget. I didn't know any of this until my cousin called me 18 months ago. She works in nonprofit accounting, and she had been doing some contract work for a regional charity consortium. She didn't give me specifics. She was careful about that, but she told me to look at the foundation's public 990 filings, the ones the IRS requires every nonprofit to make publicly available. I looked. I spent a weekend going through 4 years of 990s with a highlighter and a legal pad, and what I found made my stomach drop. Not because it was complicated, because it was so obvious. Administrative expenses that ballooned by 340% over 3 years. Consulting fees paid to a shell LLC that shared an address with the financial manager's personal business. Event costs for the annual gala that had climbed to $280,000 for a fundraising event that raised $310,000 for a fundraising event that raised $310,000. You don't need a forensic accountant to understand that spending 90 cents of every fundraising dollar on the party is not how legitimate charities operate. I called a friend from graduate school who now works as a compliance officer for a larger nonprofit. I walked her through what I'd found. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You need to report this." I said, "He's my father." She said, "Those grants belong to programs like yours, real programs. People are sleeping in detox beds that could have been funded by that money." I already knew that. I'd known it since the second year we didn't get the grant. I just hadn't let myself say it clearly. I filed a complaint with the IRS Tax-Exempt and Government Entities Division. I also contacted the North Carolina Department of Justice, which has oversight authority over charitable organizations in the state. I did this with the help of an attorney, someone I found through a legal aid referral who took the case pro bono because, she said, cases like this mattered. And then I waited. That was 14 months ago. I went back to work. I kept my caseload. I supervised my staff. I reapplied for other grants and we got 2 of them, smaller, but real. I did not tell my mother what I had done. I did not tell my brother or my sister. I told exactly 2 people, my best friend and my attorney. My father did not know I was the one who had reported him. As far as I knew, he didn't know there was an investigation at all. The gala invitation didn't come to me, obviously. It came to the treatment center, a standard mailing sent to every nonprofit in the region, probably to inflate the room count. My executive director forwarded it to me as a joke. "Thought you'd get a kick out of this," she wrote. I looked at the invitation for a long time. The gala was a black tie event at the Ballantine Hotel, $800 per table. It was a Thursday night in October, and I owned exactly one dress that fit the occasion. A navy wrap dress I'd bought for a colleague's wedding 2 years ago. I drove down after work, changed in a gas station bathroom off I-85, and arrived 20 minutes after the doors opened. Nobody stopped me at the door. The check-in table had a list, and my name wasn't on it. But I smiled at the volunteer and said I was a late addition and spelled out my last name slowly, and she looked flustered and let me in. That's the thing about events like this. Everyone assumes everyone else belongs there. I got a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I found a spot near the back of the room where I could see the stage, and I waited. My father took the podium at 7:45. He was tanned and silver-haired, and he wore confidence the way other men wear cologne, as if the room would smell wrong without it. He thanked the donors. He talked about impact. He said the word community 11 times. I counted. Then he introduced the evening's special guests, and he got to me. I say got to me because I was not a guest. I was just someone standing in the back of the room. But he got to the subject of family. He was talking about legacy, about what we build and what we pass down, and he mentioned that his children were all doing well, his son in finance in New York, his younger daughter finishing her MBA. He paused, and then he said, "And my older daughter is out there somewhere doing her own thing. She works with," and he made a small gesture with his hand, a brushing motion, like clearing crumbs from a table. "She works in social services. Government work. You know." He moved on. He made a joke. People laughed. I set down my water glass. I don't know what I felt in that exact moment. I've tried to describe it, and I can't get it right. It wasn't rage exactly. It was something colder. It was the feeling of watching someone make the same mistake for the last time and knowing with absolute certainty that this is the last time. I walked toward the stage. I don't remember deciding to do it. I remember the carpet under my heels, dark red with a gold pattern, and the sound of the room shifting slightly as people noticed someone moving toward the front. I remember my father was still at the podium, wrapping up his remarks. I remember the event coordinator off to the side, holding a clipboard, watching me with a puzzled expression. I climbed the stairs at the side of the stage. My father turned around, for 1 second. Just one. I saw something cross his face that I had never seen before. Not anger, not recognition. Something that looked, briefly, like fear. I held out my hand for the microphone. He stared at me. I kept my hand out, palm up, and I looked at him steadily, and after a long moment, he gave it to me. I don't know why. Maybe he thought he could control whatever came next. He could not. I turned to the room. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Lee Hargrove. Douglas is my father, and I want to take just a few minutes to clarify a couple of things he said tonight." The room was very quiet. "He said I work in social services," I said. "That's a generous description. What I actually do is run the clinical operations of a residential addiction treatment program. We serve about 60 patients at a time, most of them without insurance, most of them with nowhere else to go. Last year, 43 of our patients completed the full program. 38 of them were still in recovery at the 6-month follow-up. We track that because it matters, because these are real people with real lives, and this work is real work." I paused. The room was completely still. "I want to be transparent with you all tonight," I said, "because transparency in charitable work is important. The Hargrove Foundation has, over the past 4 years, disbursed approximately $1.2 million in grants to recovery-focused nonprofits across the Carolinas. That is meaningful. I want to acknowledge that." I saw my father shift beside me. He took a half step toward me. I did not look at him. "What is also meaningful," I said, "is accountability. The Foundation's public financial filings, which any of you can access on the IRS website, show some patterns that raise concerns. Those concerns were reported 14 months ago. Tonight, I can share that the investigation that followed is complete." Somewhere in the third row, a woman in a red dress put down her fork. "I am not a lawyer," I said, "so I won't use legal language. What I will tell you is that an independent audit commissioned by the North Carolina Department of Justice found significant misuse of charitable funds. The Foundation's financial manager has been removed. Corrective measures are underway, and the Foundation itself is under a consent agreement with the state that requires new board oversight and independent financial management going forward." The room started to murmur. Not loudly. A current of sound, low and electric, moving through the tables. I turned to my father. He was standing very still. The tan looked different now, or maybe the light had changed. He looked older than he had 5 minutes ago. "Dad," I said, and my voice was quiet, private, even though the microphone carried it across the room. "I've spent a long time trying to make sense of why you never took my work seriously, and I think I finally understand it. It wasn't about the work. You didn't care what I did. You cared where it put me in the order of things. You needed to be at the top, and that required someone to be below you, and I was the most convenient candidate." He said, very quietly, into the microphone's range, "Lee, don't do this." "I already did," I said. I set the microphone back in the stand, not dropped, set. Carefully. I didn't want to make a scene. It already was one, but I didn't want to make it bigger than it needed to be. I walked back down the stairs the way I had walked up, and the room stayed quiet, and nobody stopped me. In the lobby, my father caught up to me. He had moved fast for a man in his 60s, and he was breathing harder than usual when he reached me. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. "I know exactly what I've done," I said. "I filed an accurate report about financial irregularities in a charitable organization. The rest wasn't my decision. You did this to me," he said. "To your own family." I looked at him. Really looked at him. Maybe for the first time in years. The lines around his mouth, the way his jaw was set. He had always looked like a man who was right, even when he wasn't. Especially when he wasn't. "I did it for the patients," I said. "The ones who applied to your foundation and got turned down while the operational budget paid for $280,000 galas. I did it because that money was supposed to help people like the ones I work with every day, and it didn't, and somebody needed to say so." He stared at me. I could see him trying to find the angle, the negotiation, the way to reposition this. "I can make this better," he said. "There are ways to. I have resources. We can talk about this. We can." "No," I said. It was the simplest thing I'd ever said to him. I walked out through the hotel's revolving door into the October night. The air outside smelled like damp leaves and car exhaust and something clean underneath both of those things. I sat on a bench near the valet stand and called my best friend, and she answered on the second ring, and when I told her it was done, she made a sound that was somewhere between laughing and crying and said, "How do you feel?" I had to think about it for a moment. Like I've been holding my breath for a very long time, I said, and I finally just stopped. The drive back to Asheville was 4 hours. I stopped at a diner outside of Statesville around midnight and ate scrambled eggs and toast at a counter stool. And the man next to me was watching something on his phone with headphones in, and nobody knew who I was or where I'd been. I left a good tip because the coffee was hot and the waitress called me on, and it felt like the kindest thing anyone had said to me all week. My father did not call me that night. He called me 3 days later, a short voicemail that I have listened to exactly once. He said he wanted to talk. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say he'd been wrong. He said he wanted to talk, and he used the word situation, and I saved the voicemail to remind myself on any future day when I might second-guess this, that an apology that contains the word situation instead of the word wrong is not actually an apology. I have not called him back. My mother called me the following week. That conversation was harder because my mother is not a villain in this story. She is someone who learned to look at the ceiling whenever something happened in that house, and that is its own kind of damage. And I have a lot of complicated feelings about it that I am working through with my own therapist because I am a clinical social worker and I believe in therapy and I was long overdue. She cried. I let her cry. I did not say I was sorry because I wasn't, but I also didn't say I was glad because the word glad doesn't quite cover it. I told her I loved her. I told her I had done what I believed was right. I told her I had done what I believed was right. I told her I hoped she'd call me again when she was ready. She said she needed time. I said I understood. The foundation restructured. I know this from the public filings, which I continue to monitor, which is my right and possibly my responsibility. The new board hired an independent executive director. They reduced the event budget dramatically. The grant cycle last year was smaller, fewer awards, more scrutiny, but my treatment center received $47,000, directed specifically toward expanding our transitional housing beds. I bought 6 new beds with that money. 6. I stood in the room where they'd been delivered, a converted storage space off the main hall that we'd been trying to renovate for 2 years. And I looked at those beds lined up against the wall, still in their plastic wrap, and I thought about how many people would sleep in them. How many people would wake up in those beds and decide to keep going? How many people would make it to 6 months, to a year, to a life they could live? I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. I just stood there for a while, in the quiet of that room, and let it be enough. My father and I have not spoken since the lobby of the Ballantine Hotel. I don't know if we ever will. I used to think that reconciliation was something I owed him, or something I owed myself, some closure that would make the math of our relationship finally add up. I don't think that anymore. Some things don't add up. You just learn to carry them differently. What I know is this: I am 31 years old. I have a master's degree in clinical social work. I run the clinical operations of a residential treatment program, and we are good at what we do, and the people we serve are worth serving. My father spent years making me feel like that was something to be embarrassed about, like a life spent in service to the hardest work there is, should be hidden in the back of someone's biographical remarks, mentioned with a wave of the hand. He was wrong. He was wrong for a very long time, and nobody said so, and then I did. There is a particular kind of freedom in finally being the person who says so. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't undo the dinners and the holidays and the graduation gifts that felt like apologies for the fact that I existed and inconvenienced him by turning out to be myself. It doesn't undo any of it. But 6 people are going to sleep in those beds tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after that. And I think, for now, that's the part I'm going to keep.